A lot of games these days are getting a remaster if they need it or not, and personally I feel a lot of them don't really need a remaster. E.g. the Grand Theft Auto remasters. A disaster to the point where the original games look better than some parts of the remasters. And as some of us may know, modders are able to blow the remasters out of the water. However, some games really do need a remaster, and I feel Mafia 1 or Mafia the City of Lost Haven is one of those games. The game was originally released in 2002. A game where the developers had lofty dreams about where the game would go, and to my knowledge it is one of the first good linear story driven games, which is my favourite type of game, but that's not important. However, at the time the hardware wasn't really ready for it. With this remaster, I feel they are able to make the game a lot more like the original developers wanted. But of course, nothing can be perfect. And of course, that means it's time to talk about bugs I found while playing the game. As some people know, the bugs you experience depend on the hardware you're playing on to a degree. And this time round I wasn't playing on my super beefy PC, as I decided to play this game on the PlayStation 4, which isn't the most powerful hardware in the world. But anyways, let's talk about the bugs I came across. And the first one reared its head in chapter 1, and that is that the characters that are not the main characters have very, I guess I'll describe it as smooth looking faces. I don't know, it just looks a bit odd. I'm pretty sure this is hardware based. I'm sure if there's a more powerful device running the game it'd be able to render better faces, but just looked a bit odd to me. And then the next chapter, there is a small visual thing with a person getting out of a taxi and he sort of glitches through the seat. I thought I'd mention that. Chapter 7 was magical time. We came across a wizard's car. This showed up a fair bit throughout the game, but this is the first time I saw it, so I thought I'd only mention it here and just say that it's happened previous times and future times. And the last thing I'm going to point out for the bug section is chapter 9, where a cutscene just simply doesn't change the gun I'm holding. Which isn't a bug, but come on Hangar 13, you could have made it so the gun changed, right? Now, the big thing to talk about. What is the differences between the remaster and the original? And just a little tidbit before I get into this, I just want to add that I feel a lot of the stuff changed by Hangar 13 is probably for the better. The opening cutscene has been changed a little bit, apart from just obviously looking better because the game is almost 2 decades newer than its counterpart. Tommy, the main character of the game, is already in the bar waiting for the detective in the definitive edition, where in the original the detective is already waiting for Tommy. And just the way Tommy talks and acts to the detective, he's more confident, I feel more realistic, as he's more like hush hush about his Mafia life, unlike in the original where he just sort of blurts out everything for everyone in the diner to hear. Now I also know that some of the OG fans were not necessarily happy with the ability to skip the driving parts of the game in the settings. However, I feel this makes the game make more sense in terms of the story, as if you didn't know, the whole story is told from the point of view of Tommy describing it to this detective, and it's just a little bit more realistic for him to not mention driving from point A to point B. But on the topic of driving, it is a lot more easier, at least from what I've come across, than in the original game. It's like in the original game, it's like you're driving a car from the early Depression, pre-Depression era. However, in the definitive edition, I feel driving is just a little bit more easier. Cars have a little bit more speed to them and a little bit more traction. And I feel the best way to point this out is with the race in chapter 5. This race would take me so many attempts in the original version, but playing the definitive edition, I was able to beat the race my second time around. That could be because the cars control a lot easier, or maybe I'm just a little bit better at racing games now and I actually know what a racing line is. The overall story still follows the same as the original, however Hangar 13 are able to flesh out a lot more of the characters. One of the best examples of this would be Tommy's love interest in the game, Sarah, who feels a lot more like a real character now. They've also taken the time to improve the main characters a lot, as well as, if you didn't know, they have re-voice recorded every line in this with new actors, and I just feel due to technology now, it's just so much better than back then, that you get like a lot more of the right emotion from the actors. I think they even mocapped certain actors, so it looks more realistic and just feels a lot better, and it's a lot easier to become immersed in. It's especially a lot easier to become immersed in now that the city is actually alive. Now obviously because of restrictions in hardware back then, back in ye old 2002, they weren't able to render much on the actual streets, and all the buildings were sort of bland looking, and there's very little in NPC activity. However, in this new game, it actually feels like a pre-depression city, with a lot of fruit stands and stuff like that set up on the sidewalks. Obviously a lot more traffic and pedestrian activity than in the original. So just before we end here, I will quickly cover two things that I just really like about this game. One I've obviously already mentioned before, which is just how they make the character of Sarah so much better in this game than the original. So all she was in the original was like a sort of shell of a character with like, I don't actually know if she was really in the game past the chapter Sarah, where they do have that really weird sex scene that I didn't like. But yeah, in the definitive edition, they build her up as a much better character, especially just using that chapter Sarah as an example. In the original, she wants Tommy to walk her home, but in the definitive edition, she doesn't necessarily feel like she needs it. Like, she's a tougher character or person, if that makes sense. I know there's people who will say that's part of women empowerment, but also for her character, to a degree, I feel that would make more sense. As Luigi's daughter, she spent her whole life around the Mafia. So, you know, maybe she'd be a bit more tough than she is in the original. And the last thing, this is some of this is kind of spoilers, but if you don't know, at the end of the game, Tommy goes into witness protection, and then many years later he is killed by one Vito Scaletta.
Even when they're moving too fast to catch. That keeps us from falling over. When we're too tired to take another step.
Mr. Angelo.
Yes.
Mr. Salieri sends his regards.
And I just love the fact that in the definitive edition, you actually get to see Vito do it, and you know, it's noticeably Vito in the cutscene, obviously, because in Mafia 2, that's how they connected the two games, with Vito it wasn't actually Vito, it was Joe, but killing Tommy, which never really connected to me. Like, the two games didn't necessarily feel connected in the way they wanted to, but I feel they do now. And obviously, even though we don't talk about Mafia 3, there obviously is the connection between Mafia 2 and Mafia 3, being Vito like a solid character in the game. And by solid, I mean he appears a lot, not solid as in a good character, because nothing about that game was good. But anyways, this has been the video of talking about the Mafia 1 Definitive Edition remake and if it needed it, which the answer was clearly yes. And if you guys enjoyed this video, maybe stick around for more.